Hello everyone, welcome to this session. We'll just wait a few minutes for everyone to arrive, I think, and then we'll get started. Hope it's a lovely sunny day wherever you are. It's really sunny here. So I'm in Cromarty and Amanda is in Cornwall, so we couldn't be further apart really, right across the other ends of the land. So I think we'll just start now. Welcome to this XpoNorth discussion on distribution. And I'd like you to introduce you to Amanda Pyne, film distribution and finance specialist at AP Media Limited. We'll be sure to have a question and answer facility time at the end. So if you could put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, that would be great. So Amanda began her film career in 1998 at Polygram. She was a royalty manager for Universal Pictures Limited, then Focus Features. She then joined the UK Film Council's production finance team, specialising in film finance and recoupment. Eventually moving over to BFI, she also moved her family to Cornwall, something that we approve of at XpoNorth, of people working on the outer regions of Britain. And then she still worked part-time for the BFI, grew her consultancy, working with producers, financiers and sales agents, specializing in maximizing revenue return and recoupment for all stakeholders. So in the marvelous ecosystem that is filmmaking, distribution is a pretty crucial element. Everyone wants their film to be seen and to find its own audience, but it's sometimes hard for new filmmakers to discover the protocol for selling their film. So hopefully by the end of today's session, we'll be all the wiser. So Amanda, if we can start by how did you get into the industry in the first place? If you can tell us a wee bit about that, I think it's always interesting to know.
It was quite by accident. I left school at 17. I just wanted to get a job. I wanted to get out in the big wide world, and I joined a high street bank, and that was fine. And I had 2 or 3, 4 jobs. I took a year out for traveling, and then I got a job with Andrew Lloyd Webber at the Really Useful Group. And I started doing record royalties and music publishing royalties. And it was the first job I'd had that I was really interested in what I was doing. And I had a lovely, lovely bunch of people. Creative people are, I think, some of the best people to work for. They're very driven, they work very hard, but they also look after each other and have a lot of fun. And I was at the Really Useful Group for, I think, 4 years, and I had a lovely, lovely time. But then I felt like I needed to move on and do something else. So I went out for another royalties job, and I got offered 2 jobs. I got a job as a music record royalties manager and a job at Polygram. And honestly, the only reason why I took the Polygram job was the commute was easier from where I was living then in North London. So that's how I got into film. So it was quite by accident. Mm-hmm. But once I got into film, and I've had some fantastic managers along the way who have taught me so much, my interest and knowledge of film has just grown and grown. So I was at Universal for, I suppose, about 7, 8 years before, again, I thought I need to do something a little bit different now. And I joined the UK Film Council. So working from a studio, going to the Film Council, it was very, very different mindset. We went from sort of selling product really to films. Took me a little while to get my head around it, but just super interesting. Mm-hmm. At the Film Council and the BFI for a long time, and it was only when I decided to move, or we decided to move to Cornwall, that I set up a consultancy, keeping the BFI job part-time for a while, just so I could have that security while I built up my consultancy business. Mm-hmm. So I've been working from home for quite some time, and in the film industry, because we're all international, it kind of doesn't matter where you sit. And obviously with COVID, we all understand this much better now.
Yes.
Working from home for me has been brilliant because my clients are international, so I can manage my time around my clients. And I would go to London every so often, but it was more use for me to go to Berlin or Cannes or maybe Toronto to see everybody internationally at the same time. So getting into film was accidental, but once I'd found it, I never looked back.
Great. So now you're working on you have a big client base. You're working on quite a lot of things at the moment. So you're being quite successful from working from Cornwall.
Absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen now. Let me just show you. Oh, so I'm just going to go back. Apologies, I am not particularly tech savvy on these things.
We saw it briefly there.
Yeah, I was just trying to share the
Yep, can see.
Okay, so that's a couple of new movies. What I was trying to find was on my PowerPoint. I'm going to stop sharing while I fiddle about. With some of the movies that I have worked on, so you can just get an idea, because sometimes, you know, you say a film and you need just a little visual reference to remind you. But I've been very lucky to work on a lot of different films for different clients. You know, independent UK and Australian films, but also some independent American films as well.
Great. And so at what point do you become involved in the projects? What's the ideal time that you would come on board a project?
It really depends on the client and what they need. My role is to maximize revenue, and that's a very sort of easy way of explaining what I do, which is sort of quite complicated. So when I say maximizing revenue, what I mean is when your film is distributed, you want to get as much money back as you possibly can from that distribution. So when you're negotiating those contracts that will end up with you getting some money back, whether that's your financing or your sales agency contract or your distribution contract, it'd be great if I can be involved at that time, because what I do is I really drill down into the financial terms. And
I'm frozen.
No, you're fine.
You frozen.
Am I still, can you still hear me?
I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know if it's me or I think that's fine. Well, no, you've frozen for me.
Okay, well,
Amanda, I might move into a different location, see if that makes a difference. Sorry, it's all going swimming. Keep on talking about this, about how you get involved in projects. Oh, you're back.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I think everyone's okay. Cool. Yeah, so basically the sooner I can get involved, the better, because I can help negotiate the financial terms and make sure that you're not paying too much in distribution fees, make sure that your distributor isn't going to take too much in terms of expenses, making sure that the back end is apportioned correctly. So it's nice if I can get involved early on. To be honest, that doesn't happen so much because the clients I have that expertise to negotiate those contracts in the first place. So I'm often called in once the film has been released and the revenue starts flowing or doesn't flow, and people want to know why. So I have contacts with all the distributors, but obviously, whereas most of the producers and financiers will be talking to the acquisitions people and the lawyers, my contacts are in the accounts department. And they know me and I know them, and I know who to email and what questions to ask to get the reporting. And I go through the reporting with a fine tooth comb, and if there's any money there, I get the money back. So to answer your question briefly, it depends on the client, what the client needs, but it's nice to be there from the beginning to help negotiate those contracts to make them as strong as possible in the first place.
Great. So next question. So then what should a team take into consideration, even at the early stages of development, in order to help secure a distribution deal? Do you feel like it's important? What decisions should be made, I guess?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult. When I was at a studio, the first thing they do is look at the audience and go, okay, well, we need a film for 20-year-old boys or 50-year-old women or whatever it is. And it would be finding a product for a certain market. With independent filmmaking, the other spectrum of that is people go out and make a film and then say, oh, the audience will find it. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. What you want really is something in the middle. You want to be able to tell your story because you think it's a story worth telling, but you need to make sure that you're going to have an audience that's interested. So I think first and foremost, just talk to people, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Are you interested in this story? Is it something you'd like to go out and see? And then taking that to sort of the other degree, it's the things that distributors look for is even the length of the film. You know, it's very difficult to sell a 3-hour film. It's easier to sell an hour and a half film. Yeah. The content of your film, is there going to be a lot of violence, a lot of sex, nudity, that sort of thing? Obviously that will impact on the certificate that your film will have and the audience that will be able to watch your film. So some distributors aren't interested in those sort of films. Others are much more happy to take on those, like, you know, difficult films. So I wouldn't sort of say, you know, just think about how do I write a hit film, because then we'll just end up with just Fast and Furious 49 and that will be it, sort of thing. If you make a good film, it will find your audience with some help. So I would say if you're developing film, excuse me, you know, write the film you want to write, but then listen to people along the way, like obviously your producers, but your sales agents, even your financiers, people like the BFI, BBC Film, Film 4, they have an idea of what distributors will pick up at the end of the day and what won't, you know, get picked up.
Great, good. Now then, we've got SVODs funding more and more feature films.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to note that the Oscars seven SVOD funded films got Oscars this year, which is something completely new and different, isn't it, really? Just so how do you feel about that? What's your opinion on the SVOD film debate?
I think it's very interesting because at the moment the cinemas have just reopened, mm-hmm. and they are showing those Oscar-winning films. They're showing Nomadland and Minari, Ammonite, and those sort of films. That some of those you might have been able to watch already on SVOD, but people feel that certain films deserve a theatrical screening. I think there'll be a hybrid. I think the Netflix experiment with the Martin Scorsese film, The Irishman, was interesting because some people would still go to the cinema to see a film like that. Other people really wanted to watch it at home. I remember the Film Council, Pete Buckingham, who used to run distribution, he talked about distributor push and audience pull. So do we, want to be allowed, if you like, to only see films that distributors want to put in the cinema? Or should we be allowed to watch films in the way that we want to watch them now? Mm-hmm. I think it was obviously with COVID and we all locked down. I mean, can you imagine, how dull our life would have been without all those films and the box sets that we were able to see on the Netflix and the Amazons, etc. Mm-hmm. And I just think if you're going to make a film, there's no point making the film and keeping it in a box. So you want people to see it. A hybrid for me of seeing it on the big screen, but it also being available, not necessarily at the same time, but quite quickly after on an SVOD platform is no bad thing, because some people can't go to the cinema. They have children or other commitments, and it is still expensive. Mm-hmm. So I think having it available on 2 platforms, I think is going to be the way that more people are going to go, especially with the bigger budget films that are cinematographic, and you do want to see them on a big screen. But if you can't get there, then you should be given the opportunity to see them on a small screen as well.
For sure. Great. So in looking at because you have experience in both of those kind of funding routes, so maybe if we dig a deep dive into looking at those 2 methods on 2 particular films that you've worked on recently. So the first being Power of the Dog. Would you like to tell us a bit about Jane Campion and the Power of the Dog?
I've worked for Seesaw Films for a long time. In fact, they were my first client. When The King's Speech came out, it was such a hit very, very quickly. It was obvious that someone was needed to just manage that film. And I just looked after that film for Seesaw for quite some time. By then, of course, they had a lovely slate of films come along, and one of the most recent is The Power of the Dog. You say Jane Campion, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, and Jesse Plemons. I've read the book it's based on. It's a beautiful story, very powerful, and I'm really excited to see it. Filmed in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously Seesaw are in a position now that people obviously will return their calls and are really interested in getting their films. So there was various options that they could have taken, but decided to go with Netflix. It's a very easy transaction. It was Netflix and the producer, Australian producer Offset, and some money from the New Zealand Film Commission. And that was a lovely, easy way to finance your film. Netflix have been, as far as I understand, I'm not on the production side, but I think they've been very easy to work with, cash flowing, etc. And when you have that package of talent, including such experienced producers and director and actors, I think it's very easy for someone like Netflix to say, well, just you carry on and you make your film, and we'll just be on the sidelines making sure everything's okay, and we're here if you need us. So I think it was quite good from that point of view. And then it's just a case of, when are we going to be able to see the film now? It's, you know, do you place a film like that at a festival and have a festival screening of it, or does it go straight to Netflix at some point? I think those discussions are, you know, still ongoing. So, and I'm not sort of up to date with that. So that would be interesting to see how that pans out. But, you know, that sort of film, why not really let Netflix sort of come and finance? And again, you've got that option of having the film being released theatrically, but then also going on Netflix probably sooner rather than later, so that the audience can see, you know, what is potentially a really, really good film.
Yeah, but just to be clear, that Netflix take all rights of the film.
Yes.
Yeah, as does Amazon and Apple.
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes those three will pick up just for North America or North and South America, or some territories, not necessarily all territories. Depends when they come in. With Netflix, with The Power of the Dog, they were there from the beginning, so they took world. On other films that have gone down a sort of a traditional financing route, then they come in just as any other distributor and just buy rights for certain territories.
Oh, right. That's interesting. So, well, I think we'll come on to talk about territories later, because that is a kind of like an interesting issue to think about and to consider. But so great. And when's the film? So when did you say when the film was? You're not sure when it's going to be?
No, I don't know yet.
Have you seen any of it? Have you seen?
I haven't. No. So I'm just as excited as anybody else. I mean, that's one of the things with lockdown, you know, those sort of screenings that we could all go to don't happen so much. So yeah, I'm really excited to see the film.
No cast and crew screenings. So and then the other film to look at is I, Tonya, which you worked on. That was it 2000 when was that? It came out 17, was it 2017?
Yeah, I think it's 2017. That was with my other long-term client, AI Film, who is part of Access, Len Blavatnik's company. And with I, Tonya, you know, it was a great package in terms of the story and the script, and Margot Robbie on board as producer and lead actor in it, Alison Janney and Sebastian Stan. I mean, it was a great cast. The film was taken out to the American film market, and everybody wanted it. And the financier was in a really luxurious position of being allowed to pick and choose. Funny enough, Netflix did offer on that film, but it was decided to go down a different route. So it went to individual distributors throughout the world, and had a really good release. In the US, though, it was picked up by Miramax at the time, which we thought was great. But then Miramax decided that they were going to get out of distribution and just do production. So around the time that the film went to Toronto, the film festival, for its world premiere, we were trying to get the film away from Miramax and find a proper distributor for the film. And it went to Neon, who were then, fairly new US distribution company, but really got the film, absolutely loved it, did a fantastic job on it. And the film did very well, nominated 3 Oscars. So that was great. So it's very different financing, because all the distribution deals were just sort of territory by territory and just pieced together as the film was being made.
A lot of work. Sounds like a lot of work for you.
A lot of work. I mean, some films, literally every territory has a different distributor, and then other films, maybe a studio will come in and pick up half the world or some of the world, so you're dealing with less distributors. But you as a producer and also as a sales agent, is you have to coordinate all the distributors in terms of the release as well. The release may be American led, it may be UK led, and there's often a negotiation to be had there as well. And when is the film premiered? Will it be in a festival, or do you just put it out in the cinemas? There's that debate as well.
So just to go back to that decision then that the I, Tonya filmmakers made to say, we're not going to go the Netflix route here, what do you think they were considering there? What made them choose, do you think?
I think they already had quite a few deals in place at that point, and there's always a negotiation to be had of who's going to sort of pay the most money. And I don't know how many. I think Netflix wanted quite a few territories. It wasn't just North America. So I think they decided that they wanted a theatrical release. Now, it's not saying that Netflix wouldn't have done that, but there wouldn't necessarily have been the guarantee that we would have with a Neon or a Miramax or a US distributor like that. They definitely wanted a proper theatrical release.
And I mean, how much do Netflix kind of, I mean, I have heard that Netflix leave producers and filmmakers to quite well to their own sort of like devices, in a sense. They don't interfere very much. Is that true, do you think? Or
I think it depends on the producer. I mean, obviously a lot of producers don't need any hand holding. I would imagine Netflix would step in if they felt it was needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Maybe it's good to talk about territories here, though, because we touched on it a few times now. So I mean, it's interesting to know how little, in fact, the UK, how small the UK is in terms of worldwide territories. Do you want to talk a bit about that, and how you have to maybe consider not just what goes down well in the UK, but what might fit well, obviously, across in the United States, but in Europe as well, and in Asia and places too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a few years ago, the studios, when they did their own films, would pretty much look at recouping just out of North America, and they would see international as a bonus, effectively. But then there were films being released where the total of international was more than what you could get in North America. And that made them think that actually we should be concentrating on other territories more, because there is value there. When you're making a UK film, obviously English-speaking territories, so Australia, New Zealand, and US and Canada, are very important. But it really depends on the type of film you're making as to whether it's going to go down well in France or Japan or Latin America. And that depends, I mean, partly on the actors that are involved and how well they might be known out of the UK. And that's somewhere where your sales agent should really help you, because they obviously talk to international distributors all the time. So, Benedict Cumberbatch, for example, he's known around the world now, but there was a time when he was really very big in the UK, but not so much out rest of world. So, there's that point where an actor sort of crosses over from just being known in their home territory to getting international renown. In terms of the story, some stories won't appeal to other sort of cultures, if you like. we did American Animals AI film, which was Bart Layton's film, first one he did after The Imposter. Had a really good young cast, and I thought it was a really interesting story, but it just didn't go down well in parts of the world where they just sort of thought, well, I don't quite understand this story and why we're interested in these boys and what they're doing. So it didn't sell so well, and that wasn't necessarily something we realized at the time. That was something afterwards when the film was being taken into market, so you can't tell. And much older film, St Trinian's, when the reboot was done, in the UK Film Council stepped in at the last minute because the financing fell apart very late on in the day. And again, a lot of territories were kind of looking at St Trinian's going, I really don't understand this, I'm really not sure about it. Whereas of course in the UK we had a tradition of that film, and there's a lot of nostalgia for it, but also a new audience found it as well. So it actually did really well in the UK, but it didn't do much international business. So it's you know, there's a certain amount of sort of research and asking around that you can do to see how international your film is, but you might not actually know until you take it out to market with the finished film.
And I guess then it's also a balance of how much do you want to, you know, you touched on that earlier, of how much you want to take that on board and how much you just want to go with telling your own story and being true to that and not.
Absolutely.
But I remember hearing a talk about with a sales agent, and he was saying, you must have a dame. There must be a dame. Get a dame, and get a dame, and you know, you'll be fine. You know, you'll sell it everywhere. You know, dame this or whoever the dames are. You know.
Well, that's definitely going to help, obviously, if you've got that sort of cast.
Yeah.
But you just don't know. I worked for Catalyst, and they partly financed the film Finding Your Feet, which had a lovely cast of, you know, brilliant UK actors. And it opened in the UK. They'd done really good marketing promotion, and it opened that week when we had The Beast from the East, and we were all snowed in, so no one was going to the cinema anyway, and it really sort of lost its chance. So you can have the perfect package, but cinema is still weather dependent a lot of the time,
especially here.
Yeah.
Great. So now for the bit that makes my brain sore, which is the complicated business of recoupment and repayment and all that shit, stuff. So glad there are people like you in the world that do this. So do you want to tell us a wee bit about what is involved in that?
You know, a lot of UK independent financing, the financing is very similar. I mean, no two films are the same, but often the financing is similar. You have your keystone part of the financing is very much the tax credit, and it's been a brilliant boom for the UK production industry. You may or may not be able to pre-sell to certain distributors. Obviously, if it's a very UK film with the right elements, you might get a UK distributor on board very early on. You may be able to get BBC films or Film 4 involved. So you have certain bits of financing in place straight away. You may perhaps get a post-production deal where they put some equity in. And then inevitably you're going to have gap, and then you're looking for gap financing there. There are gap financiers out there, fewer and fewer, unfortunately, because it is very risky, but there are people out there that still want to do that. And then it's looking at those gap financiers, what their terms are, how expensive they are, and really how well they're going to work with you. Do they know the business? Are they going to help you and add to your knowledge? A lot of financiers out there have a lot of experience that they can help you with distribution deals and, you know, finding the right sales agent, etc. Others not so much. So it's very difficult to piece the financing together. But once you've got your financing, the recoupment order is roughly the same. Your sales agent will recoup their commissions and expenses first. Then normally your gap financier will recoup, and then your equity will recoup. However, into that mix, you may have residuals if you have SAG or WGA, DGA talent involved. And also with low budget filmmaking, inevitably there's deferrals where a producer or director or some of the talent will defer. And then there's a negotiation to be had as to where those people can recoup. If you've got the BFI or BBC involved, then they're more likely to let deferrals recoup slightly higher than if you just have gap financier and other equity involved. So it's what I would say is keep it simple. You know, don't. Sometimes people want to split the equity, you know, you recoup a certain amount here and then this happens and a bit here and then that happens and the territories are split, so you've got money coming in at all different angles. It can get very complicated. If you feel it's getting too complicated, then it, you know, try and pare it back. One of the things I do is an individual producer will come to me and say, I've got a collection statement, there's money coming in all over the place, I'm really not sure if everything's right, can you have a look? And I'll do that. Because the other thing with being a producer is you finish one film and you want to get onto your next film. But actually, if your film is a hit, it's going to take up a lot of your time. And that's one of the things that I think people really like me on board for, is I'm looking after the older films, or they can just concentrate on the new films. And then once that new film goes out, well, I can then come on board and look after that, and they can go on to the next one.
Yes, indeed. I think that's something that people maybe are surprised by, is how much there is after the film, you know, how much an ongoing, it's a forever thing, really, isn't it?
It is forever. It is forever. And if you've done individual distribution deals, even if they're only for you know, a certain amount of time, that time kind of comes around quite quickly, and suddenly you're looking at second cycle sales, or the distributor wants to renew their contract. So there's always work to be done. You can't just step away from a film, and I do think, yeah, a lot of producers don't realise that.
Yeah. So like I say, thank goodness for you. Okay, so we were wondering about the studios, because you worked a little bit in the studio system, and we thought it might be interesting to say, you know, it's not what you would normally expect. I think you were keen to point that out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they sign a studio deal and they just think that's it, they're never going to see another penny. That's not the case. Studios do pay overages. Even the Weinstein Company paid overages. I'm not saying it's easy. You have to know the right people to ask the right questions of, as I sort of alluded to earlier, but they will give you reporting, and you can ask questions of that reporting, and if your film's successful, they will pay overages. And we've had films that were sort of successful from day one, where I've collected a lot of money in overages. And then there's films where I can think of one, I'm not going to name it, but it was picked up by a studio. They kind of came in at the American film market, they hoovered up all the remaining territories, they said, we're just going to put it out on video mostly. And then in 3 years' time, suddenly we started paying overages. You know, we didn't expect that, but they paid. And that's a big studio. Mm. So some studios are better than others, for sure. Mm-hmm. But they, you know, they will pay overages. That's not to say that they're, especially the amount of the P&A, the marketing expenses that they take, are extraordinarily high. And the other thing is, if you do have a film that is a really big hit, then I would recommend that you audit a studio. And again, studios see audits as just, it's just what happens. They're audited all the time by talent agents, by SAG, WGA, DGA, and individual producers. So they almost expect it. And I work with several auditors, some based in the UK or Germany, and some in the US. And they really do know what to look for, because they've obviously done so many audits before. And it's worth at least exploring whether to do an audit. Unfortunately, if you have a studio deal, you're not going to get your audit costs back, but hopefully the auditor will have found you more revenue, so it's going to be cost effective.
Cool. Great. Okay, so You mentioned before King's Speech that you worked on, because we were talking about all the films that people that are unlikely hits, really, and St. Trinian's as well was maybe one of them. If you want to talk a little bit about that, because yeah, on a film that on paper doesn't look like it's going to do much, and then suddenly it takes off.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you know, it was a great story and a great cast from day one.
The
But
King's Speech.
the King's Speech,
Yeah.
it just, for whatever reason, just took off. And obviously Oscar nominated, Oscar winning as well. Did phenomenally well in the UK, and practically every territory it worked in. Surprisingly so. You know, some territories we thought, okay, yeah, you know, it will do okay, but it did really, really well. And what we sort of learned from that was you've always got to imagine that your film is going to be the next King's Speech, because you never know. So make sure that you get those distribution terms as good as you possibly can. We audited 13 distributors on the King's Speech, and we found money. Each and every distributor had underpaid us, so that was also a lesson learned as well. And it did generate a lot of work. And I mean, I was sort of dealing with it on behalf of the producers, but things that I had a meeting with Equity, for example, because they were getting a share and they just wanted to know what was going on and things like that. Talent agents were phoning me. So it does, you know, it's surprising how much, as you said before, it's surprising how much work it generates, but it is worth, don't write your film off and just go, oh, well, I'll settle for this. You've got to really think about, you know, if my film does break out, and a lot of films do, you've got to make sure that your distributor is in a good place to pay you more, you know, overages over and above your MG.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other examples of unlikely phenomenally successful films?
I'm not sure about unlikely. I mean, a lot of films we think, yeah, actually this could be good, and it did turn out to be good. And then other films you think, oh yeah, this is great, slam dunk. And then for some reason, just one territory just goes, no, I don't really want it. A couple of films I can think of that had a really good cast and a really good story, and if you like, they would have been easy to market as well. And the territory just went, well, no, I'm not really interested. So that can be quite surprising as well.
Yeah. It might be worth talking about the role of the sales agent, and what people do, well, what they do, and what the difference is between the sales agent and the distributor, but also what somebody does if they don't have a sales agent. You know, it's a new filmmaker and they don't manage to get a sales agent. What do they do? So it's a two-part question, I guess. So, yeah.
Well, the difference between a sales agent and distributor is the sales agent will sell on your behalf to the distributors. And the reason that you need a sales agent, if you possibly can, is they will work from day one of picking up the film to placing your film. At what point do they introduce it to the distributors? At what point do they maybe give them a script? At what point do they take some footage from the film and make a promo to show to distributors? At what point do they say, yeah, we're going to take this deal, or actually, no, I think we can get better, we're going to hold on. They will help you with your festival strategy as well, and get the film into the best festival that you can get it in. Also, when they're at the festival, they do a lot of the organisation of getting the talent over and doing any sort of promotional press junkets and parties and things like that. So they really do help you get your film into distribution. An actual distributor is the person that will physically get your film into the cinemas. They'll get the SVOD deals, the TV deals, they'll get it out on home video, hard, video, and get your film to the audience in their territory. So that's the sort of the difference. And I would absolutely recommend that if you can get a sales agent, that you do, because they have such market knowledge that they can really help you shape your film into the best up to the best point that they can then take the film out to market and sell it. If you haven't got a sales agent, it's very difficult. I would try and get your film into as many festivals as possible. There are a lot of film festivals out there. A lot of them have gone online, but I'm sure they'll go back to physical festivals soon. And you can build up awareness through festivals. Once you've done that, you might get you might get a sales agent to come on board and say, actually, there's a lot of interest in your film. Let me help you sell it, which would be great. Or you can sell to distributors yourself, which is fine, but you need to have a good knowledge of how to negotiate a distribution deal if you're going to do it yourself as a producer, as a young filmmaker. In terms of straight distribution, doing it yourself, there are some companies, some people that will help you get a film, have a limited theatrical release in the UK, but that is very, very hard. You've got to persuade the cinemas to put your film into them, and you've got to do all the promotion, all the marketing, all the publicity yourself, which is hugely time consuming and obviously very costly as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's a big job. Maybe this is the point where we should look at posters, because I was going to ask you about posters, and there's a lot of arguing about the posters, but we could look at your posters for all of these films.
Oh, I'm going to try and share my screen again. How's that? Have you got a shared screen with a few posters on it?
I can see posters. Yeah, lovely, beautiful posters.
Yeah, they are all really good posters. I mean, what's interesting with the King's Speech one is that's the American poster. The UK poster, which I'm lucky enough to have on my wall, has Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush either side of a window. The window looks out from Buckingham Palace, and in the middle it says the King's Speech, and it has the billing block of the actors. So it really just says this is what the film is about. This American one, it doesn't give you so much of a clue about the film, and I really like that. I think it's quite intriguing. If you know a bit about the film, then I think the image is great. If you don't know a bit about the film, then hopefully it will make you find out what's going on in this image. What does it represent? Sometimes, obviously, just having Ian McKellen on a film poster, I think that's just great. He is Mr. Holmes. It's all about Mr. Holmes. So it tells you immediately what the film's about. Other films, American Animals, for example, I mean, you've no idea really what that film's about. This billing block, it tells you who the director is, and it's very small on the screen, but it's the cast here. But you've got no idea what the film's about. It's very intriguing. I think it's a great poster, but some territories didn't want that poster, and I think another one was created where it had all the actors in character on the poster, so it's much more, okay, well, this is what you're going to see on the screen. The posters are devised often, you get a promotional poster devised by your sales agent, and that can change along the way. So you might get some initial stills or an initial concept for the poster that will go in the sales agent's office. And then obviously you get to a point where perhaps your film is going to a festival and you need a promotional poster for that. The artwork poster will also be done by the distributor. Now I say the distributor, that might be the UK distributor if they're sort of on board from early on. It might be the US distributor. And that artwork will be shared amongst all distributors, and they can change it and tweak it to make it pertinent for their territory. Some people will quite happily take the poster that they're supplied and just tweak it a bit. Other people want to start from the beginning. So yeah, a poster's really, and I mean, I really like looking at film posters. I think it's quite interesting to see. Certain distributors, I think, have a certain feel, a certain theme that you wouldn't necessarily know if you went in the film industry, for example. You wouldn't know who the distributor was. And others just look at it film by film. Also, I like it when a distributor has several posters out there with different elements from the film that all sort of work together. You might have, I think it was, I can't remember the distributor. There was one where each actor was shown separately in sort of a different pose, but they all came together if you saw, you know, the posters en masse, which was very clever. So yeah, film posters is definitely very interesting. And also obviously they've got to work everywhere. They've got to work on the side of a bus, in the tube, you know, in a magazine, and actually at the cinema as well.
I'm so glad that they're still considered to be, you know, to be important, because they're so beautiful. You know, some of them are so beautiful, as you've said. And do they actually still feel that they're, you know, they're really important in the marketing strategy? Like posters are way up there still. Like,
yeah, I think so. But I think the days of having, you know, you know, back in the day, you used to have a wonderful illustration, didn't you? Like a still from the film or the actors or whatever. I think those days are definitely gone. I think it's pretty much it's photos of the main actors setting a scene, so you understand what the film is about.
so I think if anybody's, I've got a couple more questions, but maybe it's time we should just encourage people to put questions in the Q&A, so then we can ask Amanda. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you about trends and also how you think the industry is ridden through COVID. But are there any sort of like current trends that distributors are looking for in the that you can identify for us, or?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think distributors are quite open-minded. It's not so much about trends, it's about pigeonholing an audience, I think. So there's obviously distributors always looking for content for younger audiences, for children, that isn't that doesn't come from a studio. So that's always interesting. No, I don't think there's any trends particularly, to be honest. I mean, obviously we're having many more stories that are being told by women. I don't like the word, you know, I don't like saying women's stories, but you know, stories about women, that there is an audience out there. I mean, you know, obviously to us, but distributors are sort of waking up to that. I think you know, as long as the story is well told, it's easier for a distributor market if it has big talent in it, but that's, you know, not completely necessary if you're making an art house film and it gets that publicity. Then people are, you know, they want to go to the cinema and discover new talent all the time. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there is a trend particularly. They just want, you know, good stories sort of well told.
Good stories well told. That's exactly brilliant. Right, we've got a few questions. I think yeah, I think that one's been answered, that the session will be available later to access. I think somebody said a recorded session will be available on social app within 48 hours and later on Expo Facebook site. So that one's answered. Any thoughts and advice? This is from Ian Mackay. Any thoughts and advice on producing a sizzle reel for a project in development, trying to get people interested in, especially duration and how much to spend?
Duration. I mean, this is not my area of expertise at all. I mean, a sizzle reel, I don't know. Honestly, I'm sitting here thinking, could I sort of make this up? But I can't. I don't want to tell you wrong. It's not my area of expertise. I don't know. Talk to a sales agent about that. I'm sure that they'd be happy to just have a chat and tell you what would be good for them to have.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then as a budding Highland-based short film producer working with Highlands and Islands writer-directors, what would you suggest for planting seeds with potential investors and distributors so that in 2/3 years, I'll have a viable commercial project to pitch? Hope that makes sense.
Planting seeds, interesting. Short films, obviously get your short film out there. There are some wonderful short film festivals. So try and get your name out there. It's very difficult planting seeds. Talking to people, just chatting to people at markets, festivals, online. Sorry about that. just getting your name out there, networking as much as you can. I think, yeah, just getting your film into festivals if you can, getting your name out there.
Yeah, good advice. And then from Natasha, do you have any thoughts or tips for historical documentaries? We haven't talked about documentaries. You have done a few documentaries, I think, but not particularly strong. But do you have any tips on how they sell historical documentaries?
Documentaries, I mean, we at the UK Film Council, we did Man on Wire, for example, which did, you know, amazingly well. And I think it's the same as any other film. It's got to be a good story, well told. Documentaries are very difficult to get into the cinema, I think even more so these days. In terms of tips, I mean, I think history is difficult because it can be a little bit, not another historical documentary. I think it's maybe finding a twist, perhaps. I think with Man on Wire, there was some sort of recreations, wasn't there, which always works to add some drama, if you like, to the storytelling.
Yeah, good. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we've got just now. So, but we've got a wee bit more time if anyone wants to put one in. So yeah, COVID and its effect on the industry, huge subject. But I mean, not only in producing but also distributing, and in terms of distributing, like the Bond film, for as a case in point, it's going and then it's pulled, and then it's going and then it's pulled, and there's the Bond film, but then there's also the little films that have been pulled, maybe for, I don't know, award seasons and things like that. So I think there's a few things to be said on.
Yeah, I mean, the Bond film, it's an event film, and you know, I was talking to my brother about it the other day, and I didn't realize that him and his son is in his 30s now, every Bond film, they go to the cinema together to see it. And they hardly go to the cinema any other time, but they will go together to see the Bond film, and they've always have done. And I think that's indicative of those event type films. So I can 100% see why they have held on to that. And I'm really pleased because I'm a Bond fan as well. I like going to see the Bond films. It's just one of those things that a lot of people go to that they don't normally go to the cinema. So I'm pleased they've held it because the cinemas need that. They need that, you know. Even my local cinema, when Skyfall was out, I had to wait ages to see it because it was sold out night after night, which is great. Those cinemas really need those tent poles every now and again, which gives them the money to be able to afford to put in the art house and the first time director type films. So I think they're a very important part of film distribution. The films that have been held back, I mean, it's interesting. I had a look this morning to see what my local cinema is showing. I went to see Nomadland recently and Ammonite, both films. You know, I think people, obviously with Nomadland, with Oscar winning, it's a no-brainer to put it out there. And again, to give people the opportunity to see that sort of film on the big screen is very important. With Ammonite, there was an interest. People wanted to see the film. So it kind of, why not just hold it back or put it out again and just see what happens. So both of those are doing quite well. And then other Oscar nominated films like Minari is out there at the minute, and The Father. I think there's a lot of interest in The Father. So I think with the films that have been in the public domain, if you like, for quite some time, there's been enough feedback for the distributors to know, yes, actually, we should put that out in the cinema. There's an audience for it. With something like the film you mentioned, All Is Love?
After Love, it's the most beautiful film.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I saw a trailer for that ages ago and I thought, wow, that's intriguing. And again, I think it's just one of those films where there's been enough feedback online and, you know, in social media that people know that it's worth putting out there. So I think it's great that those films have been held back and you can see them in the cinema.
because I saw it at the BFI London Film Festival, which was online last year.
Mhm.
And honestly, it left me a puddle on the floor. I couldn't speak. But then I thought I expected it to go into the awards, into the BAFTAs and everything, and it didn't. And I wondered why. And I thought, well, maybe they've held it over so that it can have this season. And I hope anybody who's watching gets a chance, go and see it. It's absolutely exquisite. Like, so yeah, so that's yeah, and production as well. Like, has there been a halt in what you're working on at the moment from COVID, or is everything?
Yes. I work for BBC Films, and when the first lockdown sort of hit, they had so much sort of unwinding to do, helping filmmakers either halt films that were actually filming, or sorting out what was going to happen on films that were about to go. So people like BFI and BBC, I think, have been fantastic at helping filmmakers over that period. In terms of remounting, you have to get all the elements in there, and sometimes everything will be ready to go, and perhaps a certain member of the talent didn't want to come back from the US or go to a certain country, which is understandable. But as far as I'm aware, I think all the films that I know of that they actually had to halt production, the films have now been finished and they're in post, so that was good. I think most people know that films that were going into post, all the post houses managed to get their people working from home. So a lot of post-production was done from home over the lockdown. So there's films that are ready and are just waiting for a distributor, or waiting for the cinemas to open more fully before they decide what their release strategy is. So I think there's going to be some good films coming up, and there's a lot of filming going on at the minute. And we have the sort of, if you like, the nice problem that it's people are sort of fighting over space and production stages and talent.
Yeah.
And the thing at the moment, I think we talked about this before, Lindy, is about how you tell a story. Producers now are optioning books, or they're getting scripts, and they're looking at them going, right, do we make this as a film, or do we make this as a TV series? And that's a lot of companies now, they don't call themselves a film company or a TV company, they're almost, you want to call them a storytelling company. It's how do you tell the story in the best possible way. And I know a producer the other day, she said, actually, we were going to make this as a series, but we've decided to make it as a film. Yeah. And conversely, a lot of people, they get a film script and think, actually, there's a much bigger story here, let's make it as a series. So I think that's interesting. And us as viewers, we want to see both. We want to see a really good story told over 6, 8, 10 hours, as much as we want it told over 1.5 hours.
For sure. Well, we're coming to the end now. I think we've got a couple of minutes to go. But I was just going to say, I don't think we've got any more questions, but I was just going to say, is there a one big do and a one big don't that you can give people? Like one piece of advice, yes, you must do this, or one, no, never do this.
Well, you know, as I'm very much finance oriented, I would say when you read a distribution agreement, make sure you really understand how the revenue is going to flow. There's a few, most lawyers are fantastic, but there's a few lawyers out there that don't they can't sort of get the words and find out how that's going to flow through into the figures. One of the things I like about my job is it's a mixture of words and figures. I read a distribution contract, but what I'm pulling out are the figures, the percentages, and how much the advance is and that sort of thing. So if you don't understand your distribution contract, just put your hand up and say, this doesn't make sense, because it might not just be you. There might be either someone's overcomplicated it, or they've put something in wrong, or I've had things that just literally don't add up to 100%, mistakes are made. Right. So just make sure that you're happy and comfortable with something before you sign it, and don't be frightened to say, I don't understand this. Make sure that you're happy with it.
Great, that's great. And I think that's a great place to end. And just two takeaways for me: always about good stories well told, and also thank goodness for you and people like you. but there are people doing your job. And I hope that everybody's found that to be an interesting session, because I certainly have. And thank you so much for your time. And we didn't even get into what filmmaking's like in Cornwall, which is what I also wanted to hear about, how the scene is down there. So we'll do that next time.
That would be great. Yeah, we've had a thriving scene, and we've just had House of Dragons filming down on St Michael's Mount. So that's been very exciting. Have Warner Brothers down here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. And thank you everyone for attending. And yeah, I think, do I wait to, don't know what to do here now. Yeah, so enjoy the rest of your day. Is it sunny there?
It's a bit miserly, but I think the sun's breaking through. So I'm going to the garden for a walk.
Great. Enjoy that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye.